Hello and welcome to another English language class. My name is Happiness Demo, and today we'll be studying Sentence Components Part 2 in the theme English Grammar Structural Patterns. Before we begin our lesson today, let's take a look at our objectives. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define prepositions and prepositional phrases, give examples of prepositions and prepositional phrases, define infinitives, define past participles and present participles, make sentences using past participles and present participles as adjectives, define modifiers and gerunds, and make sentences with modifiers and gerunds. Now let's go to our lesson. In our previous lesson on sentence components, we looked at subjects, verbs, objects, and complements. Apart from these sentence components, other sentence components are prepositions and prepositional phrases, infinitives, present participles acting as adjectives, and past participles acting as adjectives, modifiers, and gerunds. So in this lesson, we would consider these sentence components. What are prepositions? Prepositions are words that show the relationship between a noun or pronoun and other words in a sentence. They usually occur before nouns in sentences. They show how one word or one noun or pronoun relates to another word in a sentence. And usually prepositions occur before nouns in sentences. For example, the students ran across the road in search of their classmates. The words across and of are the prepositions in this sentence, and they occur before nouns, just as we said. Across occurs before the road, while of occurs before their classmates, which is a noun. And then we have, did you place the new textbook among the torn ones? The preposition among shows the relationship between the new textbook and the torn ones. And lastly, mother instructed us not to walk through the dark street when it is late. The preposition through shows the relationship between walk and the dark street. So these words are prepositions. Now, what are prepositional phrases? Prepositional phrases simply refer to a group of words that consist of a preposition and a noun phrase, or a group of words that consist of a preposition, its objects, and its modifiers. So a prepositional phrase refers to a group of words that have a preposition and a noun phrase, or a preposition, a noun or an object, and its modifiers. For example, in the classroom, inside the old locker, beyond the ancient stream, over the fence. These are examples of prepositional phrases. If you look closely, you'll find that they all have prepositions and noun phrases in them. For example, here we have in. In is a preposition, while the classroom is a noun phrase. Here, inside is the preposition, and the old locker is the noun phrase. Beyond here is the preposition, and the ancient stream is the noun phrase. And over here is the preposition, while the fence is the noun phrase. So you find that prepositional phrases always have a preposition and a noun phrase. Now let's look at how these prepositional phrases are used in sentences. My teacher made me sit in the classroom till school closed for the day. During the search, we found old books inside the old locker. Have you ever walked beyond the old stream? Have you ever walked beyond the ancient stream? Did you check under your wooden bed for the missing key? So these underlined words are prepositional phrases in these sentences. Another component of sentences we'll look at is the infinitive. What are infinitives? Infinitives simply refer to the base form of verbs without any suffix or inflection. They are the forms of verbs as seen in a dictionary. Infinitives are the forms of verbs that do not have any suffix attached to them. By suffix, I mean additional letters at the end of the word, like ed or ing, and so on and so forth. They simply refer to the ordinary form of the verb, the base form of the verb. For example, we have the verbs stay, go, eat, jump, dine, drive, scold, examine. These are infinitives because they do not have suffixes attached to them. They are the base form of the verb. Some infinitives are preceded by to, but at other times, the verbs occur without to. When we find infinitives in sentences sometimes, you find the preposition to occurring before the infinitives. But other times, we find the infinitives standing alone. For example, I decided to go home after the long meeting we had. Here we find to preceding the infinitive go. Whenever I stay at home, I just sleep. In this sentence, we have two infinitives, the verb stay and sleep. I wanted to attend rehearsals today, but I didn't get to. Here we find the infinitive attend preceded by the preposition to. Now note that infinitives preceded by to are known as to infinitives, while those without to are called bare infinitives. So in sentences when you find to occurring before an infinitive, such infinitives are called to infinitives, while the ones without to in front of them, or the ones without to preceding them, are called bare infinitives. Another component of the sentence is the present participle, which acts as an adjective. What is a present participle? The present participle form of a verb is the form of a verb which shows that an action is continuous or in progress. So we've defined the present participle as the form of a verb that shows that an action is continuous or in progress. Verbs in present participle usually end in ing, and most times these present participle verbs act as adjectives in sentences. For example, walk carefully so you don't wake the sleeping child. Here the word sleeping is a present participle verb, but acts as an adjective. Now, adjectives are words that describe or modify a noun. So in this sentence, walk carefully so you don't wake the sleeping child. The present participle sleeping describes the child. What kind of child? Sleeping child. So here we find a verb, a present participle verb describing a noun. And then again we have mother took the boiling water off the fire. Boiling is a present participle verb that describes the noun water. So here also, the present participle verb acts as an adjective which describes a noun. I asked Nneka to get me a bar of washing soap from the store. Washing is a present participle verb which describes the noun soap, hence making it act as an adjective. And lastly, baking powder is used to bake bread, cakes, and cookies. Baking, which is the present participle here, acts as an adjective which describes the noun powder. So we find that present participles sometimes in sentences act as adjectives, and a good way to identify present participles is that they end in ing. So present participles are also one of the components that make up a sentence. Now let's look at past participles which act as adjectives. These are also components of sentences. What is a past participle? A past participle, or the past participle form of a verb, refers to an action that has been completed. They usually have the auxiliary verbs have, has, or had preceding them. Past participle verbs are the forms of verbs that refer to actions or an action that has been completed. And when you find them in sentences, you find that the auxiliary verbs have, has, or had precedes these verbs. For example, Nkechi has gone home. Gone is the past participle verb preceded by the auxiliary verb has. Now, sometimes past participle verbs also act as adjectives, just like present participle verbs. Let's look at these examples. My little sister loves eating boiled eggs. Boiled here is a past participle verb, but it describes the noun eggs. So it makes it an adjective in this sentence. Broken bottles were littered all over the place. Broken is a past participle verb which functions as an adjective by describing the noun bottles, broken bottles. Mother prepared mashed potatoes on Saturday. Mashed is a past participle verb that describes the noun potatoes, so it also acts as an adjective. And lastly, my boss wears ironed shirts to work every day. Ironed is a past participle verb which acts as an adjective by describing the noun shirts. So in these sentences, we find past participle verbs playing the role of adjectives by describing the nouns that follow them. So past participles that act as adjectives are also components of sentences. Another component of the sentence is the modifier. What is a modifier? A modifier is a sentence component that describes another word or group of words in a sentence. Modifiers are words or group of words that function mostly as adjectives or adverbs. They describe nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Modifiers are simply words that describe nouns, verbs, adjectives, or adverbs in sentences. And mostly, they function as adjectives by describing nouns or pronouns, or they function as adverbs by describing verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. For example, Tejiri's teacher applauded her because she writes beautifully. Beautifully here is the modifier because it describes how Tejiri writes. So it describes the verb writes. My neighbor bought me a very big box for Christmas. Very big are modifiers. These words are modifiers of the noun box because they describe the noun box. So these modifiers function as adjectives because they describe the noun box. And the next example says, Fola and I walked home slowly from school. Slowly here is the modifier because it describes how Fola and I walked. It describes the verb walked. So here, slowly performs the role of an adverb because it describes the verb. And lastly, the man in grey suit looks very good. Grey is the modifier here because it describes the color of the man's suit. Also, very good is also a modifier because it describes how the man looks. So these are all modifiers playing either the role of an adjective or an adverb. Modifiers are also components of sentences. Another component of sentences would look at are gerunds. What are gerunds? Gerunds are simply verbs that play the role of nouns in sentences. And so, they perform the role of subjects and objects in sentences. Nouns occupy the position of subjects or objects in sentences. So because gerunds play the role of nouns, they also occupy the position of the subject or object of the sentence. Gerunds usually end in ing. Now let's look at the examples on the board of how gerunds play the role of subjects and objects. Sweeping and washing are my favorite chores. So here, both sweeping and washing are the subjects of this sentence. Simi does more reading than her siblings. Here, reading, the gerund reading, performs the role of the object. Do you enjoy singing like I do? Here, singing performs the role of the object. Editing and proofreading go hand in hand. Editing and proofreading stand as the subject of this sentence. I prefer Rosemary's teaching to Busayo's. The gerund here is teaching. So these are examples of gerunds in sentences as subjects or objects. Another function of gerunds, apart from being the subject or object of a sentence, is that they function as predicate nouns. What is a predicate noun? A predicate noun is a noun preceded by a be verb or a linking verb. Predicate nouns rename the subject of sentences. When you find a noun occurring after a be verb, that is the forms of the verb to be, or a linking verb, such a noun is called a predicate noun. And gerunds perform or act as predicate nouns in sentences. For example, Shola's favorite hobby is swimming. Here we find the form of the be verb is, which stands as a linking verb, occurring before the predicate noun, which is a gerund, swimming. Ejiro's daily task is writing and editing. Writing and editing are both gerunds, but here they function as predicate nouns because they occur after the be verb is. Now note that gerunds and present participles are not the same, although they end in ing. The difference between both gerunds and present participles is the fact that gerunds perform the function of nouns while present participles perform the function of verbs which are in progress or are continuous. So be careful not to mix them up. We've come to the end of our lesson today on sentence components part 2. Now let's remind ourselves of all that we have learned so far. Today we learned that prepositions are words that show the relationship between nouns, pronouns, and other words in a sentence. We also learned that Prepositional phrases are groups of words that consist of a preposition and a noun phrase. We also learned today that infinitives are the base form of verbs without any suffix or inflection. Also, we learned that past participles are the forms of verbs that refer to actions that have been completed. We also saw today that present participles are the forms of verbs that refer to actions that are in progress. And also, we learned that a modifier is a word that describes a noun, verb, adjective, adverb, or group of words in a sentence. And lastly, we learned that gerunds are ing verbs that function as nouns in sentences. Now let's go to our test section. Our question for today says, identify the modifier in the sentence below. Emeka and his friends drove their bikes carefully down the hill. What is the modifier in this sentence? Is it A, his friends, B, carefully, C, drove, or D, the hill? The correct answer is carefully. Carefully is the modifier here because it describes how Emeka and his friends drove their bikes. So if you picked B, carefully, you are correct. We've come to the very end of our lesson today on Sentence Components Part 2. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you for watching and see you next time.